The DB11 is the Aston Martin of choice for those craving something sleek and graceful rather than overtly aggressive. This, arguably the classiest car in the Aston range, is primarily a consummate sporting luxury GT that can also be dynamically rewarding whenever you need it to be. It's very desirable indeed. Welcome to what is, according to its makers at least, the most important car in Aston Martin's history, the DB11. At its launch in 2016, it took the brand into new territory and sets out to be completely different from any Aston before it, at the same time as being a comfortingly familiar evolution of the brand. We've heard exaggerated claims of model significance before from this British maker, most notably with the launch of this car's DB9 predecessor back in 2003. But this time, things really are different. Take the engine, which in the DB9 and mostly also in its predecessor, the DB7, was always Aston's own V12. Here, you can choose a V8 too, and almost all customers do. The 4-litre unit, the first in an Aston to be turbocharged, sourced from Mercedes-AMG and a product of this British maker's technical partnership with Daimler. The stiffer, more sophisticated aluminium platform it sits upon also reflects this car's completely fresh approach, as does the inclusion of technology previously foreign to the brand. Things like electromechanical power steering, multi-link rear suspension and torque vectoring. In over 100 years of Aston Martin history, it's difficult to think of a more radically orientated engineering step forward than this. All of that promises much in terms of driving dynamics, though Aston Martin still doesn't position this DB11 as the kind of out-and-out sports car its slightly more affordable Vantage model can be. But that's perhaps appropriate. Right from the moment that British businessman David Brown first bought this brand back in 1947, hence the DB model naming, there was also a need to produce powerful grand touring GTs, and we've seen plenty of those over the last 70 years. The DB11 answers that call better than any model before it, whether you choose this coupe body style or the gorgeous Volante convertible. Both will be as comfortable on a transcontinental highway as on a twisting alpine pass. And both claim to be everything a super luxury GT sports car ought to be. That's the promise. What's the reality? Let's find out. Take a seat behind the wheel, and you could be in no other kind of car. There's something about an Aston Martin cabin that marks it apart. Much the same could be said about the oral experience that begins once you push the big crystal button in the middle of the dash and start her up. A long stab on the button gets you the quiet start feature that'll fire the engine without disturbing the neighbours. A quick push though, like this, gets you the full fat fireworks. Almost all DB11s are sold with a Mercedes-AMG sourced V8 4-litre twin turbo up front, and this one's no different. If that's a disappointment for you, the rich booming engine note, well, it won't be. Painstakingly tuned by Aston Martin for a unique sonic signature. It's all natural too, in contrast to rival models that amplify engine noise by merely tweaking the exhausts or artificially embellishing the sound through stereo speakers. But then Astons have always sounded good. This one talks the talk, but can it walk the walk? First impressions are encouraging. No Aston Martin I've ever driven has steered as sharply as this, talkatively relating the roadway to your fingertips without disturbing them with it. This DB11's a GT, not a track-tamed sports car, as the brand keeps reminding us. But this part of the company's model line does at least now have a sports car style CV. multi-link rear suspension, near perfect 50-50 weight distribution, and a far stiffer chassis than the previous DB9 all bode well for the experience to come in twistier tarmac territory. But first, you'll want to know whether this British bruiser is as properly fast as a £150,000 GT contender of this kind ought to be. It is. A thoroughbred sports car deserves a thoroughbred engine, and regardless of provenance, this car's V8 is exactly that, with an exhilarating roar under hard acceleration, yet with a growl that becomes muted and melodic when cruising. On paper, the figures certainly stack up. This 503 horsepower power plant developing peak power, a thumping 685 newton meters of torque from just 2,000 RPM. But that knowledge still doesn't quite prepare you for the experience on offer when the road opens up enough for you to bury your brogues into the carpet. As soon as you do, the melodic cruising growl instantly becomes an exhilarating roar, to the accompaniment of an unbroken stream of acceleration. There's no launch control system offered, but assuming the tarmac is dry and you're in a hurry, 62 miles an hour from rest will detain you for 4 seconds exactly. The seamless mid-range pulling power is untroubled by any kind of turbo lag, which makes you wonder why every 21st century Aston model prior to this one was so wedded to normal aspiration. With this V8, the location of its twin single-scroll turbos so close to the cylinder head in the 90-degree V between the engine blocks helps greatly in this regard, a design originally pioneered by Ferrari Formula One engines. Should either a runway or a deserted stretch of de-restricted autobahn be to hand, the horizon will continue to scroll towards you as if on fast forward until you reach 187 miles an hour. Aston seeing no need to impose upon owners a 155 mile an hour speed limiter. So yes, whether you specify this car in this coupe guise or in equally powerful open-top Volante form, it's very, very fast. I should point out that you don't have to have a V8. The 5.2 litre V12 that this DB11 was originally launched with continues on in the top AMR flagship model, offered only as a coupe. This even more melodic power plant ups the ante to 630 horsepower, but a prodigious amount of extra weight rather blunts the impact of all those extra braked horses, the net result being that the AMR model really doesn't feel significantly faster than this standard one. The figures rather bear that out. The 62 mile an hour sprint time for the AMR V12 registering at 3.7 seconds, with torque up by only 15 newton meters over the V8. True, the AMR version's top speed, 208 miles an hour, is quite a lot higher, but only because Aston decided to hold the V8 version back a bit in this regard to leave a little extra space for the 12-cylinder model at the top of the range. Regardless of engine, you'll obviously need full mastery of the various driving modes to experience all that this DB11 has to offer. There are 3, activated by this S button on the right-hand steering wheel spoke. As usual with these kinds of setups, the various settings alter steering feel, throttle response, stability control thresholds, and the change times of the ZF 8-speed auto gearbox that Aston prefers to the dual-clutch Merc transmission that's normally mated to this 4-litre V8. GT is the default mode and the one you'll be using most often, a really good balance of comfort and aggression. Next up is Sport, with Sport Plus a final option that's still sensible enough for public highway use. Unfortunately, there's no option to individually tailor specific parameters from the different modes to your particular preferences. On the plus side though, adaptive damping is separated off into its own system, with GT, Sport and Sport Plus settings accessible through this left-hand steering wheel button. Whatever options you select, it's pretty hard to go too far wrong in terms of this DB11's drive demeanour through the turns. I remarked recently how this car's closest rival, the Bentley Continental GT, sets out to combine most of the agility of a McLaren or a Ferrari with much of the luxury of a Mercedes S-Class Coupe, and gets remarkably close to achieving it. Well, this Aston nails that brief even more precisely. Better indeed than any GT sports car weighing the best part of 2 tons has a right to. You'll start to feel that weight a little more on particularly tight secondaries, but even then, these seemingly endless reserves of engine boost mask that mass very cleverly. The brand made a lot of changes to the suspension setup of this car to coincide with the introduction of the V8 engine in 2017, and they made a big difference. Indeed, most of the time the body control in the GT setting is so good that it actually isn't that often that you end up thinking that it ought to be tighter. The lesser 4-litre twin turbo unit also benefits from 115 kilograms less weight in the nose in comparison to the V12, and either way the torque vectoring system works seamlessly through the turns to transfer traction to the wheel best suited to use it. You never quite lose your sense of the sheer size of this car on narrower roads in the way that you might, say, in a rival Porsche 911 Turbo S, but the stiffer chassis and that balanced weight distribution that we referred to earlier more than play their part in making this DB11 feel more nimble than you'd ever think it could be. I'm not sure it would feel quite as good on a circuit. That impressive electrically powered steering setup lacks just a touch of the kind of final element of feel you might want when cornering at really high speeds, but that's only in comparison to cars that are intentionally more track focused than this one. You'd buy an Aston Martin Vantage, or perhaps, if funds permitted, the brand's more exclusive DBS Superleggera model, if that was your priority. These cars will offer more track-orientated brakes than this one too. In the past, with Astons on track, we've usually found that the discs tend to start smoking pretty heavily after 4 or 5 laps of heavy use, and reports from DB11 circuit tests seem to suggest the same will continue to be true here. Optional ceramic discs aren't offered to compensate. But as we keep saying, there are better cars that you could choose in this segment for track day heroics. There are a few though that I'd choose over this one if, say, late at night at an exclusive party in Cannes, I suddenly realised that I needed to be in Paris at daybreak. For such a jaunt, a DB11 would be just about perfect, even though this car, slightly unforgivably, lacks some elements of camera-driven safety kit and autonomous driving tech that its GT raison d'etre suggests it really ought to have. If you can overlook this and have the necessary funds, there's really very little else not to like. It feels special on a secondary switchback. It feels special if you're merely collecting your dry cleaning, helped by a sensible ride height that doesn't see you wincing every time you come across a pothole or a speed hump. An exotic super sports car you can really use? Now there's something. And it's British. Well, mostly British anyway. Aston Martin's future, it seems, is being built at last on solid foundations. Aston Martin tells us that it aspires to make the most beautiful cars in the world. Is this one of them? There are many who would say so. Prior to the DB11, modern era Astons, though sleek and elegant, had all tended to look rather similar. Here too you get the usual long bonnet, sweeping roofline and short rear overhangs. But this time round, stylist Marek Reichman and his team wanted to build on these established design cues to create a car with a bit more of its own identity, yet one still respectful of a historic DB line design legacy that's given us icons like the DB2, the DB4, the DB5, and more recently the DB10, developed specifically for the James Bond film Spectre, a model that provided the aesthetic inspiration for this car. Here, as you can see, we've opted for the coupe body style. The alternative Volante convertible features a special 8-layer fabric hood that takes just 14 seconds to lower and 16 seconds to close and can be operated at speeds of up to 31 miles an hour. Now, whichever version you prefer, distinctive touches are plentiful, starting with this sharply sculpted clamshell bonnet that features twin mesh cooling vents. The bonnet has a pronounced power dome that flows into this more prominent front grille, the source from which all the body's form and surface lines seem to emanate. These full LED headlights are another striking feature, incorporating daytime running lights and low-speed cornering lights. The fact that these things had never previously featured on an Aston prior to this one tells you much about just how far behind the technological curve the company had fallen before the launch of this car. In profile, possibly the first thing you'll notice is this dramatic roof strake, which comes either in a silver polished finish or, as here, in gloss black, and flows in an unbroken arc from A pillar to C pillar. It's apparently an incredibly labour-intensive component, being first extruded, then stretch bent, then pressed, then laser cut, then polished, and finally anodised to achieve its complex shape. Almost as distinctive is this front wing side strake, which is larger and more eye-catching than it was on the old DB9 and forms part of the so-called curlicue that extracts high-pressure air from the front wheel arches to reduce lift. Filling those arches are huge 10-spoke 20-inch wheels, through the spokes of which you glimpse powerful 6-piston monoblock brake calipers with 4-piston calipers featuring at the rear. The rims are shod with bespoke Bridgestone S007 tyres, featuring a tread, pattern and construction uniquely tailored for this car's handling characteristics. It's the rear view, though, that marks the most dramatic styling departure from this model's predecessor. Immediately obvious is this potent lower diffuser section that envelops these huge twin exhausts. And you'll admire these distinctive boomerang-shaped three-dimensional LED tail lamps, apparently the thinnest fitted to any production car. Arguably more significant, though, is what's missing. The stylists were unwilling for the profile of this model's distinctive sloping tail to be disrupted by a conventional spoiler. So instead, the aerodynamicists developed the Aston Martin Aeroblade, a virtual spoiler fed by discrete intakes located at the base of each C-pillar. Air is channeled through ducts that pass within the body before exiting via this slot in the rear deck lid to create a jet of disrupted air that reduces rear lift. When maximum stability is needed, a small active spoiler automatically deploys to add a little extra downforce. As usual, of course, what's more important is the stuff you can't see. Composite material is used for the rear haunches, the front wings and the rear deck lid. The door frames are made from magnesium, and the bumpers, the front splitter and the rear diffuser are created from injection moulded plastic. Otherwise, as usual with an Aston Martin, there's a structure primarily fashioned from aluminium, though it's very different from the older VH platform used by 21st century models from the brand prior to the DB11. This chassis is 39% stiffer and 21 kilograms lighter than that of the previous DB9. The latter stat particularly significant given the weight saving needed to offset the addition of heavy extra items this time round, like multi-link rear suspension and the twin turbochargers used by the two potent power plants. On delivery, you won't be able to resist taking a quick look at what lies beneath the bonnet. It's front hinged in classic British sports car style, and the V8 engine we've got here is hand built by a Mercedes craftsman in Affalterbach, just as any AMG unit would be. So as usual bears its craftsman's signature. Aston's own alternative V12 unit sadly isn't fashioned using the same one engineer per engine philosophy. The monocoque the engine sits in is now based around pressings rather than extrusions, which is a key reason why, though this car is hardly any bigger than its predecessor, it's claimed to be significantly more spacious inside. Let's take a look. The door sills here are slimmer than those of the previous DB9 model, which makes cabin entry easier. And once inside, the interior is, sure enough, significantly more roomy than it was before. Potential Bentley Continental GT buyers who previously might have doubted that an Aston Martin could be as day-to-day usable an alternative will have cause to think again here. True, the seating position is lower slung than it is on the Conti, and you're still as ever with an Aston cocooned around a sculpted high-rise centre console, but this is a car you could imagine driving regularly on occasions when a similarly priced McLaren or Ferrari might be left beneath its fitted car cover in your oak-timbered garage. Previous Aston models tended to dazzle you inside with classy highlights and hand-stitched leather, but then disappointed under closer inspection with an assortment of sometimes rather cheap-feeling fitments borrowed from the parts bin of whichever automotive conglomerate happened to be owning the company at the time. News that today's Gaydon-based company had borrowed much from its Mercedes shareholder in terms of cabin electronics led us to wonder whether the same might be true this time round, but happily what we've got instead is easily the classiest cabin the brand has ever brought us. Apart from this single steering wheel stalk, the only element that a Mercedes owner would really recognise is this 8-inch central display screen at the top of the centre stack. A little disappointingly, it doesn't glide classily out of the fascia top when you fire the ignition, as the cheap old Volvo source monitor did on the previous DB9. But otherwise, as with any Merc, this screen is difficult to fault in terms of its sharp graphics and slick operation. Everything you'd expect to find is incorporated, including voice activation, navigation, a DB audio system, Bluetooth audio and phone streaming, a 360-degree bird's eye view camera setup, and a Wi-Fi hub. There's no Apple CarPlay, Android Auto style smartphone mirroring option though. The display isn't touch sensitive, but you do get the kind of low-down rotary controller that you'd have to do without on that rival Bentley, a feature that makes it so much easier to select what you want without taking your eyes off the road. Unfortunately though, you have to pay extra for the touchpad that sits above the circular dial, the pad surface offering gesture and character recognition. Anything this infotainment setup can't tell you will be covered off by the digital dash that replaces conventional dials in the instrument binnacle you view through the faintly squirrel stitched steering wheel. Appropriately, the display is dominated by a central rev counter which has an inner ring that glows red when Sport mode is selected. Select Sport Plus and the outer ring glows red too. To the right of this virtual central dial sits a screen segment delivering various other selectable options, a trip computer, navigational instructions, radio and media settings, telephone info and service data. But there's no option to expand any of these readouts to fill more of the binnacle display, as would be the case with most rival TFT instrument screens. Previously, I mentioned the brand's heritage in providing cabins with classy highlights and hand-stitched leather, and there's plenty of that, especially in a car like this one with upholstery and an intricately stitched roof lining that are both trimmed out with gorgeous Caithness leather, featuring this eye-catching celestial perforation finish. The optional brogue-style leather treatment looks even better. Personally, I'm less sure about this Tamo ash dyed open pore wood finish used on the doors and around the centre console, but there are plenty of other trimming options offered as alternatives. Does the way that all of this is integrated with the various cabin features have the bulletproof, hewn from granite feel that you get in a rival Bentley? Possibly not. The way the door clunks slightly uncertainly shut isn't especially encouraging. It's all a big step forward for Aston Martin though. Ergonomic features you'll need to adjust to include these centre stack auto gear shift buttons, a familiar Aston touch, and the way the ventilation controls are rather crammed together just beneath. Here's another unusual feature, this optional powered lid that covers the transmission tunnel cubby. It's completely unnecessary and you'll love it. Once the immaculately stitched top has eased its way back, a pair of cup holder attachments are revealed, while further back you'll find an SD card slot, twin USB ports and a 12-volt socket. Otherwise though, there's less storage space than there really ought to be in a GT sports car. There's no overhead compartment for your sunglasses, you don't get a glove box, and the door pockets are shallow and pretty useless, as is this small slot in front of the infotainment system rotary controller. You don't even get illumination for the vanity mirrors, though they're immaculately crafted. On the plus side, there's a much wider range of seat adjustment than Astons of this sort really ever used to have, and the awful old fly-off handbrake that Astons used to have has here at last been replaced by a much easier electronic button. On the plus side, when it comes to cabin space, you do at least get a pair of rear seats, the kind of thing that most junior supercars at this price point make you do without. Now, you won't be expecting much from these, and you shouldn't be. This car is, after all, still only billed as a 2+2, which is usually industry shorthand for rear pews suitable only for kids or eunuchs. Still, it helps that the long doors open wide. As an adult, you've really got to be quite athletic to squeeze yourself back here. And once inside, the seatback glides worryingly rearwards to a point where it seems certain to crush your knees. Fortunately, a detente built into the electric mechanism avoids that calamity. At least though, the 65mm wheelbase increase this car enjoys over its DB9 predecessor means that it's actually realistic for those above school age to think about sitting back here for times of absolute necessity. In that previous model, if you didn't have small kids, these rear chairs were really only any good for jackets or designer shopping bags. This time round, Gaydon insists that there's 3 more inches of legroom and 2 more inches of headroom, though as you can see I'm brushing the stitched ceiling. There's no storage provided back here, so appropriately no incentive whatsoever to stay. By the way, you do still get these rear seats if you opt for the Volante convertible body style. Finally, let's take a look out back. Now, this car's 65mm overall length increase over the DB9 led us to expect a larger boot, and sure enough, that's what you get. That previous model's restricted 186-litre trunk is here replaced by a much more usable, well-shaped 270-litre space that sensibility might dictate you should fill with the optional bespoke 4-bag designer luggage kit so that you can maximise every inch of it. A Bentley Continental GT offers 88 litres more, but what's available here will probably be quite sufficient for the weekend needs of most owners. Bear in mind that with the alternative Volante convertible body style, luggage space falls to 224 litres, but Aston still reckons that's enough to allow you to take a couple of sets of golf clubs. This is also where the optional umbrella will be sited. Whatever your choice of variant, there are no tie-down points, nor do you get space beneath the floor or a fold-down rear seat backrest option. 2 back wall compartments are provided, the left one housing the tyre repair kit and the one on the right incorporating the handbook. A warning triangle sits on the inside of the boot lid. The DB11 range is pretty straightforward, kicking off with this V8 powered coupe model, which costs just under £150,000. If you can stretch to around £160,000, you can get yourself the Volante convertible version, which uses the same engine. Some potential buyers, though, may be of the opinion that an Aston Martin really needs a V12. So for these people, that engine configuration lives on here with a rare and extremely focused DB11 AMR model only offered with the coupe body style and costing around £175,000. As for the competition, well, bear in mind that this is a Grand Touring GT sports car, not a focused, more track-orientated junior supercar, like, say, the kind of Porsche 911 Turbo S, Audi R8 V10 Plus, Honda NSX, or McLaren 570S or 570 GT that you could buy for this kind of money. Aston Martin has its V8 Vantage model to compete in that segment. So what are more natural DB11 rivals? Well, the most obvious one is the Bentley Continental GT. The W12 12-cylinder version of that car costs around £9,000 more than this DB11 V8 Coupe, but offers nearly 125 horsepower more. But the Bentley's slightly heavier and less agile than this Aston Martin, though is slightly more spacious and practical. It really comes down to what you want. What else? Well, a Mercedes S-Class Coupe in AMG S63 V8 guys gives you similar performance to a DB11 V8 and costs around £30,000 less, but isn't really exclusive enough. Much the same SL in S65 form with a V12 engine would cost you around £190,000, but isn't sharp enough to appeal to someone who might consider the 12-cylinder version of this Aston. Every other exclusive front-engine GT sports car you could realistically look at would cost a lot more than an equivalent DB11. A Ferrari GTC4 starts at around £200,000, while a Rolls-Royce Wraith starts at around £250,000. If, having considered all of this, you decide that there's nothing quite like a DB11 and you're looking to acquire one, then you're going to be interested to know just how generous Aston Martin has been with the standard specification. Well, let's see. You get big 20-inch 10-spoke alloy wheels shod with bespoke Bridgestone S007 rubber and fitted out with dark anodized brake calipers. Other key inclusions run to keyless entry, a noise-insulated laminated windscreen, power folding heated mirrors, front and rear parking sensors, and an alarm immobiliser. Driver-orientated features include adaptive damping and a driving modes system, both setups offering selectable GT, Sport and Sport Plus settings. Inside, the sports seats are heated and powered with memory settings and are upholstered in Strathmore leather. Black leather is used for cabin inlays and for the stitched steering wheel. A satin silver jewellery pack coats many of the interior elements with that finish, and you get an Alcantara headliner. There's a customisable TFT digital screen replacing the conventional instrument binnacle dials, and a further 8-inch centre dash LCD screen from which you can access a whole range of standard features. These include navigation, a 400-watt Aston Martin audio system, a DAB tuner, Bluetooth audio and phone streaming, a 360-degree bird's eye view camera setup, and a Wi-Fi hub. There's no Apple CarPlay, Android Auto smartphone mirroring option, but iPod and iPhones can easily be integrated into this infotainment package. Other standard cabin features include cruise control with a speed limiter, dual zone climate control, and a trip computer. Now, before we get into the way that you can personalise this Aston Martin, a word about the unique specification of the desirable DB11 V12 AMR model. Visually, this version is distinguished inside and out by exposed carbon fibre and gloss black detailing, and the way that all the exterior brightwork features have been given darker monochrome finishing. Inside, with this exclusive derivative, there's monotone leather and Alcantara upholstery and a special carbon fibre trimmed sports steering wheel. 3 unique designer specifications are available for this top variant, plus from launch, an even more unique AMR Signature Edition variant was offered. On to options. Aston Martin has its own bespoke queue service to help customers tailor their cars to their own specific wishes. But we're going to assume here that you'll be making a lot of the decisions yourself. That is, after all, part of the pleasure of buying such an exclusive sports car. Paint colour is key, of course. This car's finished in midnight blue, but there are many other shades available through the brand's so-called contemporary AML paint palette. In getting the exterior of your chosen DB11 model finished to your taste, a good starting point may well be one of the 6 offered designer specifications created by Aston Martin's in-house design team. These intended to demonstrate exactly what can be possible in terms of colour and trim combinations. There's everything from classic understatement and minimalistic modernism to flamboyant contemporary schemes. The new heritage package might appeal. That's green with a silver roof and tan leather. Or if you're an extrovert type, maybe the Intrepid Sport package would suit you better. Orange paintwork, black leather and trim. You might, though, prefer to make all the individual stylistic decisions yourself, in which case a lot of very pleasant options await you. Take this distinctive roof strake. If you don't want it body coloured, should it come with a bright anodised gloss silver finish, or as here, in gloss black? The big 20-inch wheels can be had either with shadow chrome styling, with a silver or gloss black diamond turned finish, or with a Y-spoke forged finish. And whatever your choice, the rims can be fitted out with brake calipers more distinctively painted in either black, red, yellow or grey. There are 3 exterior finisher packs, bright, Q carbon, or as in this case, dark, which sees the front grille, exhaust pipes and side strakes finished in black. And if you want to go further with the dark, mean look, you can have gloss black finishing for the roof panel, the wing mirror caps, the windscreen surround, and on the Volante on the tonneau finisher too. Black or titanium finished bonnet meshes are available. The door releases can be specified in carbon, and the tail lights can at extra cost feature the smoked red finish that we've got here. On the top AMR variant, V12 front wing badges can be specified. Some buyers might also be interested in the under bonnet jewellery pack, which sees various engine features picked out in gold. The engine cover can be specified in carbon fibre, as can the exhaust tips and the deployable rear spoiler. You can even have branded tyre valve caps. For the interior, there are 3 overall cabin trimming choices. Aston calls them environments. The first is monotone, where everything's one relatively dark colour. Then there's Q-split, which introduces light shade trimming strips into the upholstery and the door cards. And finally, duotone, where lighter shades are far more prevalent. You can mix and match with various upper and lower environment colours too. Beyond that, the seat upholstery can feature either Balmoral leather or, as here, Caithness leather, with both hide finishes also extendable to the A-pillar and the headliner. The upholstery can be had with contrast stitching, Nexus quilting, brogue detailing, or as here with a special celestial perforation finish. Cooled seat ventilation is also available, and the headrests can be either embroidered or embossed with the Aston Martin Wings badge, or as here, simply with DB11. If you don't like the standard cabin satin silver jewellery pack, then alternative satin champagne or dark chrome finishes are available. You might also want to add in trim inlays in carbon fibre, various types of exposed and chopped carbon, piano black, satin tan lace wood, or light or dark ash. We've got Tamo ash dyed open pore inlays here. A colour keyed steering wheel might appeal to some, and there's a special Roccona headliner if you don't like the ordinary Alcantara one. We'd prefer to get the carbon fibre sport steering wheel with paddle shifters, the one used on the top V12 AMR variant. Some buyers may also like to consider the heavy pile floor mats, the colour-keyed boot carpet, or the personalisation that you can add to the door sills. There are 5 alternative seatbelt colours too. We've got one of them here, champagne. What else? Well, other extras DB11 owners tend to want include things like a heated steering wheel and an electrically powered steering column with an up and away function that'll make it easier to get in and out. Most owners go for the touchpad for the infotainment system that offers character recognition, multi-touch and gesture support. On this particular car, there are powered seat bolsters too. We're not sure we'd bother with the glass key, but we'd quite like the powered armrest and the powered lid that you can add to the transmission tunnel cubby. The auto park assist system that steers you into spaces would be useful too. And we'd want the Vodafone automotive vehicle tracking setup, which once purchased also requires an annual subscription. Many buyers opt to upgrade the audio system, either to the 700-watt Aston Martin premium setup that we've got here, which gets Dolby Pro Logic sound, or ideally to the 1000-watt Bang & Olufsen BO sound package, the highlight of which is dash top-mounted tweeters that rise up when the stereo is switched on. A performance driving course could be of interest too. Practical options include various bespoke car covers, a garage door opener, a key pouch, a branded boot mat, a first aid kit and a battery conditioner that allows you to monitor your car's battery voltage. This car features the optional built-in umbrella and holder, and we definitely want the tailored 4-piece luggage set designed to maximise boot space. The bags can even be matched to the interior finish you've chosen. And there's a touring pack designed to fit neatly into the boot that includes a warning triangle and a rechargeable LED flashlight, as well as high visibility jackets. Enough with options. What about DB11's safety provision? Well, as you'd expect, all the basics are in place. Aston Martin is keen to stress that this car's freshly developed aluminium chassis is extremely strong. And of course there are twin front, side and curtain airbags, plus tyre pressure monitoring and the usual electronic systems, including dynamic torque vectoring for extra cornering traction, ABS braking with emergency brake assist for panic stops, and a dynamic stability control setup with an interim setting that allows a little extra tail slip but will help you out in extremis. Isofix child seat attachments are fitted to the back seats, and at extra cost you can have an Isofix attachment fitted to the front passenger seat too. Unusually for this segment, there's no option to specify carbon ceramic brakes. Unfortunately though, like some other makers in this sector of the market, Aston Martin chooses to make the sophisticated camera-driven safety features we're now well used to seeing on ordinary family cars either optional, or the brand doesn't offer them at all. There's no autonomous braking setup available, for example, and blind spot monitoring costs extra. You can't have something as basic as lane departure warning, and even more bewilderingly, given this car's grand touring ethos, you can't specify adaptive cruise control either. You'd think auto-dipping headlights on a GT model would be useful, you can't have them. As for any of the latest autonomous driving tech that presumably Aston Martin has access to through its partner Mercedes, well, that's lacking too, as is the option of a head-up display. Still, the brand reckons that DB11 buyers will have more important priorities than these. And they're probably right. If you're able to afford an Aston Martin DB11, it's doubtful that you'll be overly concerned with the trifling matters of economy and emissions. But they mean a great deal to Aston Martin, and here's why. The company needs to reduce the average CO2 output of the models across its range or face punitive EU fines, hence the introduction of the battery-powered Rapide E and the brand's current development of a DBX SUV crossover model that will be a gas-electric hybrid. There's nothing like that on offer to DB11 buyers, and you could rightly argue that there shouldn't be. But efforts have certainly been made. Rather amusingly, Aston refers to the change in the V12 engine size from 6 litres to just 5.2 litres as downsizing. And more relevantly, there is of course the decision with this DB11 to offer a V8, an engine that's crucial in key markets like China, where the local tax regime based on engine displacement makes the 4-litre power plant £70,000 more appealing than the V12. It's also significant that both the V8 and the V12 feature cylinder deactivation, another step in the right direction when it comes to the question of improving efficiency on a classic Aston model of this kind. You might be familiar with this kind of setup, one that on light to mid-throttle loads cuts out half of the cylinder bank before restoring it seamlessly when extra acceleration is needed. As a result, the fuel and CO2 figures ascend beyond the level of embarrassment should you incur the wrath of green-minded friends. Or at least they do in this V8 model anyway, which manages 28.5 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and puts out 230 grams per kilometre of CO2. With the V8 Volante, you're looking at 28.3 miles to the gallon and 230 grams per kilometre. And the few that will go for the V12 AMR Coupe get offered what are likely to be completely unachievable official figures of 24.8 miles to the gallon and 265 grams per kilometre. Whatever engine you decide upon, hard use will of course quickly see your fuel returns spiralling down towards single digits. What else? Well, insurance is predictably a top-of-the-shop Group 50, but better news comes with industry experts Cap's expectation that residual values for this car will remain stronger than most of its immediate rivals. The old DB9 managed historically to recover, well, around 40% of its value after 3 years and 36,000 miles, but the DB11 is so far doing rather better. Dealership visits, of course, won't be cheap, but there shouldn't be a need for unnecessary ones these days. The old Aston adage that customers could find out what was wrong, saving the brand a lot of development time, bother and expense, has thankfully been long abandoned. These days, the asking price includes 5 years of maintenance too. Obviously, hard use will result in heavy brake and tyre wear, and on the subject of tyres, the bespoke Bridgestone S007 rubber will be fearsomely expensive to replace, so bear that in mind before you go track day showboating. The founders of this brand, Lionel Martin and Robert Bamford, had a clear vision: to create sports cars with a distinctive character. Cars built to a high standard, exhilarating to drive and to own. Cars with power, beauty and soul. For more than 100 years, Aston Martin has made motor cars just that way, building nearly 60,000 of them, 80% of which are still in use, cherished, driven and raced by enthusiastic owners all around the world. In all of this history, though, no model line has been more significant to the future of the marque than this one. The DB11, after all, was the Aston that began the company's crucial second-century plan to bring its model range up to date. It's proved to be the first modern-era contender from the marque, able to take on its German and Italian rivals head-to-head, wheel-to-wheel. Faster, more sporting cars have followed it from the Gaydon factory, but there's still nothing quite like this one when it comes to pure GT-style elegance. There are certainly quicker, higher tech or more sharply handling options in the market, but when you've miles to put on the clock and want the journey to feel special rather than just effortlessly rapid, it's hard to think of anything much better. True, in certain areas the brand's limited resources show: the relative lack of sophisticated safety kit, the absence of autonomous driving tech, the need to borrow Mercedes-sourced cabin parts. But none of this will really matter once you've fired that glorious engine and heard the inimitable Aston growl. And in summary, well, as a GT sports car with classic brand heritage for someone who wants a junior supercar but couldn't quite live with one, the DB11 is difficult to better. Which is just as well, because much is riding on its gracefully arched shoulders. In over 100 years of manufacturing, Aston Martin has never turned a profit. Now it has to. And this is the model that will either lead the company commandingly into its second century or consign it to the kind of fate that befell historic British sports car brands like Triumph and MG. Having tried a DB11, we believe there's reason to be confident about the company's future. Do that for yourself, and we think you'll feel the same way.